Hello on a bright Saturday. It looks maybe too bright. I'm thinking if I should, oh, there's a beautiful bird hopping around. I'm thinking if I should change my position, but I assume most of you are just listening and the visual doesn't really matter that much. So let's read. I am on chapter 33 of, you can't even see the edition I'm holding up, the Every Man's Library edition. Irene, hello. Hello, Siddharth. Welcome. I'm glad you're done with tests. I wanted to recap because there was some discussion in Discord of some of my regulars that follow along, and they're a little bit lost because they kind of, it's hard to keep up if you watch it episode by episode. So I always assume everybody's just binge watching, but if you're watching it as you go, it is easy to get lost. So there are 5 Bennet sisters. Can we test the teleparty? I have time after this at art, so yeah, for sure. There are 5 Bennet sisters. The Bennets live in England, and their home, the way the laws are done in England, is that their home is entailed, which means when their father dies, the house, even if their mother's living, the house goes to another man named Mr. Collins. Well, Mr. Collins came to meet the Bennets, and he was going to marry one of the sisters, the 5 girls. The one he liked was the second, Elizabeth. She didn't like him back, so she refused to marry him. The oldest daughter, Jane, is very beautiful, very lovely, very charming, and she had a love interest named Bingley. Bingley was very wealthy. He went off to London, and his sister told Jane that he was destined to marry another girl, the sister of his friend, Darcy. Darcy's kind of this upright, very proud, very arrogant guy with bad social skills, but good looking. He's kind of drawn to the second sister, Elizabeth, the one that Mr. Collins asked to marry. She's not as beautiful as Jane, but she's kind of spunky and got a good personality. So where are we right now? The 3 younger Bennet sisters, and I'm not going to get into their names because honestly I don't remember them, but they're not main characters. The 3 younger sisters have stayed back home in their home with their parents, while the oldest Jane has gone to mend her broken heart in London with her aunt and uncle. She's not seeing Bingley, even though he's there. And Elizabeth has gone off to visit her cousin, Charlotte Lucas, who ended up marrying Mr. Collins, the one that Elizabeth rejected. I know, got a little dicey. So they're in town, a town near London, visiting the Collinses, the family. And Elizabeth is getting to know the very wealthy patron, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. While she's there, Lady Catherine has a young, beautiful daughter who's not in great health that supposedly Mr. Darcy, the handsome one that's wealthy, that's snooty, is supposed to marry. He has shown up, and he's showing some interest in Elizabeth also, but he's very hard to read. And this other guy, Fitzwilliam, is with him, and he's kind of interested in Elizabeth too. None of the Bennet girls are married or engaged at this point, and all the love interests are complicated. So that's where we are. I hope that kind of helps recap everything. So let's read page 177, chapter 33. More than once did Elizabeth, in her ramble within the park, unexpectedly meet Mr. Darcy. She felt all the perverseness of the mischance that should bring him where no one else was brought, and to prevent its ever happening again, took care to inform him at first that it was a favorite haunt of hers. She wanted to not have him come, so she said, I'm here all the time, and if he's not really interested in her, since she doesn't want to see him, she's thinking, I'll tell you I'm here all the time, and he'll stop coming. He'll take the hint. How it could occur a second time, therefore, was very odd. Yet it did, and even a third. It seemed like willful ill nature or a voluntary penance, for on those occasions it was not merely a few formal inquiries and an awkward pause and then away, but he actually thought it necessary to turn back and walk with her. He never said a great deal, nor did she give herself the trouble of talking or of listening much, but it struck her in the course of their third rencontre that he was asking some odd, unconnected questions about her pleasure in being at Hunsford, her love of solitary walks, and her opinion of Mr. and Mrs. Collins's happiness. And that is speaking of Rosings and her not perfectly understanding the house. He seemed to expect that whenever she came into Kent again, she would be staying there too. His words seemed to imply it. Could he have Colonel Fitzwilliam in his thoughts? She supposed if he meant anything, he must mean an allusion to what might arise in that quarter. It distressed her a little, and she was quite glad to find herself at the gate in the Pales opposite the parsonage. I always have to check. Hey, Alani Garcia. So this is not a long read. She was engaged one day as she was walking and reperusing Jane's last letter and dwelling on some passages which proved that Jane had not written in spirits, when, instead of again surprised by Mr. Darcy, she saw on looking up that Colonel Fitzwilliam was meeting her. Putting away the letter immediately and forcing a smile, she said, "I did not know before that you ever walked this way." "I have been taking the tour of the park," he replied, "as I generally do every year, and intend to close it with a call at the parsonage. Are you going much farther?" "No, I should have turned in a moment." And accordingly she did turn, and they walked towards the parsonage together. "Do you certainly leave Kent on Saturday?" said she. "Yes, if Darcy does not put it off again, but I am at his disposal. He arranges the business just as he pleases. And if not able to please himself in the arrangement, he has at least great pleasure in the power of choice. I do not know anybody who seems more to enjoy the power of doing what he likes than Mr. Darcy." "He likes to have his own way very well," replied Colonel Fitzwilliam, "but so we all do. It is only that he has better means of having it than many others, because he is rich, and many others are poor. I speak feelingly. A younger son, must be endured to self-denial and dependence." So again, in the British inheritance laws, typically the oldest son got all the family wealth, and the younger children, the younger females, really got nothing, and the younger males either went into the clergy, as I mentioned before, or the military, or they might do some kind of middle-class business. But the eldest was the one who inherited everything. And so it wasn't a very fair system at all. The sun is really bright, getting my vitamin D, which is good for us. In my opinion, the younger son of an earl can know very little of either. Now, seriously, what have you ever known of self-denial and dependence? When have you ever been prevented by want of money from going wherever you chose, or procuring anything you had a fancy for? These are home questions, and perhaps I cannot say that I had experienced many hardships of that nature. But in matters of greater weight, I may suffer from the want of money. Younger sons cannot marry where they like, unless where they like women of fortune, which I think they very often do. Oh, Fareed, hello. All right, I gave a recap too, Fareed. You might want to come back and watch this later when it's not live. I am on page 173 if you're in the same edition, chapter 33. So she's saying, well, if you marry a rich girl, if you like a rich girl, you'll be fine. Our habits of expense make us too dependent, and there are not many in my rank of life who can afford to marry without some attention to money. Is this, thought Elizabeth, meant for me? And she blushed at the idea, but recovering herself, said in a lively tone, "And pray, what is the usual price of an earl's younger son? Unless the elder brother is very sickly, I suppose you would not ask above £50,000. He answered her in the same style, and the subject dropped. To interrupt a silence which might make him fancy her affected with what had passed, she soon afterwards said, "I imagine your cousin brought you down with him chiefly for the sake of having somebody at his disposal. I wonder he does not marry to secure a lasting convenience of that kind. But perhaps his sister does as well for the present, and as she is under his sole care, He may do what he likes with her. No, said Colonel Fitzwilliam. That is an advantage which he must divide with me. So now I'm on 174. Just turn the page. I am joined with him in the guardianship of Miss Darcy. Are you indeed? And pray what sort of guardians do you make? Does your charge give you much trouble? Young ladies of her age are sometimes a little difficult to manage, and if she has the true Darcy spirit, she may like to have her own way. As she spoke, she observed him looking at her earnestly, and the manner in which he immediately asked her why she supposed Miss Darcy likely to give him any uneasiness convinced her that she had somehow or got pretty near the truth. She directly replied, You need not be frightened. I never heard any harm of her, and I dare say she's one of the most tractable creatures in the world. She's a very great favorite with some ladies of my acquaintance, Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley. I think I've heard you say that you know them. I know them a little. Their brother is a pleasant, gentlemanlike man. He's a great friend of Darcy's. Oh, yes, said Elizabeth dryly. Mr. Darcy is uncommonly kind to Mr. Bingley, and takes a prodigious deal of care of him. Care of him? Yes, I really believe Darcy does take care of him in those points where he most wants care. From something that he told me in our journey hither, I have reason to think Bingley very much indebted to him. But I ought to beg his pardon, for I have no right to suppose that Bingley was the person meant. It was all conjecture. What is it that you mean? It is a circumstance which Darcy, of course, would not wish to be generally known, because if it were to get around to the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing. And you may depend upon my not mentioning it. Remember that I have not much reason for supposing it to be Bingley. What he told me was merely this, that he congratulated himself on having lately saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage, but without mentioning names or any other particulars, and I only suspected it to be Bingley but from believing him the kind of young man to get into a scrape of that sort, and from knowing them to have been together the whole of last summer. Did Mr. Darcy give you his reasons for this interference? I understood that there were some very strong objections against the lady. And what arts did he use to separate them? He did not talk to me of his art, said Fitzwilliam, smiling. He only told me what I have now told you. Now Elizabeth has heard that that this guy Fitzwilliam thinks Darcy was the reason Bingley quit talking to Jane. But she doesn't know many details. Elizabeth made no answer and walked on, her heart swelling with indignation. She's angry. After watching her a little, Fitzwilliam asked her why she was so thoughtful. Not like kind thoughtful, but in her thoughts. I'm thinking of what you've been telling me. Your cousin's conduct does not suit my feelings. Why was he to be the judge? You rather disposed to call his interference officious? I do not see what right Mr. Darcy had to decide on the propriety of his friend's inclination, or why, upon his own judgment alone, he was to determine and direct in what manner that friend was to be happy. But, she continued, recollecting herself, as we know none of the particulars, it is not fair to condemn him. It is not to be supposed that there was much affection in the case. That is not an unnatural surmise, said Fitzwilliam, but it is lessening the honor of my cousin's triumph very sadly. This was spoken jestingly, but it appeared to her such a picture of Mr. Darcy that she would not trust herself with an answer, and therefore, abruptly changing the conversation, talked on indifferent matters till they reached the parsonage. There, shut into her own room, as soon as their visitor left them, she could think without interruption of all she had heard. It was not meant to be supposed that any other people could be meant than those with whom she was connected. There could not exist in the world two men over whom Mr. Darcy would have such boundless influence. That he had been concerned in the measures taken to separate Mr. Bingley and Jane, she had never doubted, but she always attributed to Miss Bingley the principal design and arrangement of them. She thought Miss Bingley was the reason she believed that Darcy could have the character to separate Bingley and her sister, but she thought it was more Miss Bingley because she wanted Darcy for herself. So she was trying to put everything together that way. If his own vanity, however, did not mislead him, he was the cause. His pride and caprice were the cause of all that Jane had suffered, and still continued to suffer. He had ruined for a while every hope of happiness for the most affectionate, generous heart in the world, Let's not forget Elizabeth truly loves Jane, and I think Jane is truly all that we think she is: beautiful, sweet, kind, good. And no one could say how lasting an evil he might have inflicted. There were some very strong objections against the lady, were Fitzwilliam's words, and these strong objections probably were her having one uncle who was a country attorney and another who was in business in London, like she wasn't, their family wasn't good enough. To Jane herself, she exclaimed, there could be no possibility of objection. All loveliness and goodness as she is, her understanding excellent, her mind improved, and her manners captivating. Neither could anything be urged against my father, who, though with some peculiarities, has abilities which Mr. Darcy himself need not disdain, and respectability which he will probably never reach. When she thought of her mother, indeed, her confidence gave way a little. And so she's like, okay, he's objecting to our family. Well, he can't object to my dad. My dad's a wonderful man. He's got some little quirks, but he's a wonderful man. She says, and my mother, well, she knows what her mother's like. Indeed, her confidence gave way a little, but she would not allow that any objections there had material weight with Mr. Darcy, whose pride, she was convinced, would receive a deeper wound from the want of importance in his friend's connection than from the want of sense. And she was quite decided at last that he had been partly governed by this worst kind of pride, and partly by the wish of retaining Mr. Bingley for his sister. So not only was their family not good enough, but he had ulterior motives that he wants Bingley to marry his sister. The agitation and tears which the subject occasioned brought on a headache, so she gets upset, she gets emotional, she gets a headache. And it grew so much worse towards the evening that, added to her unwillingness to see Mr. Darcy, it determined her not to attend her cousins to Rosings, where they were engaged to drink tea. Mrs. Collins, seeing that she really was unwell, did not press her to go, and as much as possible prevented her husband from pressing her. But Mr. Collins could not conceal his apprehension of Lady Catherine's being rather displeased by her staying at home. So that is the chapter, and we're 17 minutes in. Let's see how long this one. I think, that's probably I hear my computer. Let me see, I've got enough battery. I think it's overheated. So, Fareed, since you tell me that, I'm not going to keep reading because I've left my computer out and it feels hot. The fan's running. So, we will stop at 33 and I'll pick up on 34. I wonder if I can pick it up on my laptop, on my phone, because I've got the time to read. But I'll go over with Siddharth to Discord and we'll try a read. Not a read, a teleparty. We're going to watch something together and see if that works. So you guys that haven't joined Discord already, if you want to come to our teleparty, you need to go hop on. You can find the link. I think we've put it in several of the Pride and Prejudices in the past. Look in the comments section. Or you go to Discord and find Best Tutor Friend is the channel. I don't know if that's what they call it. Fareed, thank you for telling me that the sound quality isn't good. That's annoying and I don't want to make it worse. So I will read to you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. See ya.